This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Best of Today podcast. I'm Martha Carney, and in today's programme we focused on the cost of living crisis. You could say that it's a perfect storm. Gas and electricity costs are predicted to rise by 50%. Prices more generally could go up by 7% as inflation soars. Mortgage rates are expected to rise, so is council tax. And on top of all of that, the government's bringing in tax increases. National insurance is going up in April and allowances on income tax are being frozen. The Prime Minister is being urged by some of his MPs and one cabinet minister not to go ahead with those plans, but the Chancellor says the money is needed to fund social care and the NHS. The BBC's North of England reporter Rowan Bridge has been to Tameside in Greater Manchester to see what impact the rising cost of living is having there.
Do you want to help yourself to just 5 items off these tables?
Thank you. Some pop, some deodorant.
For Neil Daly, the rising cost of living has left him in a position he'd hoped he'd never face, using a food bank because he's run out of money. He works up to 15 hours a week for a charity, but the shifts aren't guaranteed. He says it's not worth him getting a full-time job because what he would lose in benefits wouldn't be offset by the sort of salary he could earn. But rising costs mean he's struggling to keep his head above water.
Can't even afford a bus ticket at the minute. A lot of things I can't afford to do. I can't afford to eat at the minute, and bills are piling up, so I'm just wondering what I'm going to do. I'm scared of what future holds, really. Tin potatoes.
After unpacking his shopping, we go to a local coffee shop to chat. It's run by a charity and managed by Amanda Allen. She works there part-time and says her customers are all feeling the squeeze, as indeed is she.
Once you've paid everything out, there's not a lot left at the end of the month.
I mean, we're expecting energy bills to go up by potentially 50%.
Yeah.
What's the impact of that going to be?
I'm going to have to be watching when I switch the heating on. Food prices are going up, so I think a lot of us are all in the same boat, really.
Are you surprised to find yourself in that situation?
Yeah, definitely.
From Tameside, I'm driving south and west towards Trafford, one of the more affluent areas of Greater Manchester, and specifically the town of Sale. On the high street, I meet Eleanor Coleman-Reid. Both she and her husband are middle-class professionals, yet they too have felt the impact of rising prices.
I worry about whether I can afford to have more children. Like, can I have a sibling for my son? Because for nursery prices is another thing which is really expensive, and that's just going up, and you don't really see the government do anything about that. And me and my husband have like reasonably well-paying jobs, and yet we can't seem to afford to live at the moment.
How worried are you about what might happen this year then, in terms of financial shocks?
With the energy crisis, that's another thing where we're just really worried that we're not going to be able to continue to afford it, really, just because you don't see the government kind of stepping in and doing things. Price of petrol, the price of gas, it's still just so high, so we're struggling. It's just something that I think is constantly on not just my mind, but I know I've got a number of friends in a similar situation.
All of the people I spoke to have already felt the impact of the rising cost of living. With more price rises coming this year, Citizens Advice Manchester say the outlook for many of those who approach them is much like the weather in Sale Town Centre, cold and bleak.
Rowan Bridge. I also talked to Torsten Bell, Chief Executive of the Resolution Foundation, a think tank that focuses on low-income families. He's been describing 2022 as the year of the squeeze. I asked him why.
Well, I think for lots of people, it probably already feels like the squeeze has begun, in the sense that inflation obviously hit a 10-year high back in November of over 5%, and it's heading up towards 6 and 6.5% in the next few months, and that's significantly faster than the rate our wages are going up. So it probably already feels like people are being squeezed. I think it's going to feel particularly acute because of the coming together at the same time of tax rises and energy bill increases in April, and particularly on energy bills, it's because the way in which a mixture of policy decisions plus, the contingencies of how the global energy market is played out is that lots of people's bills are going to go up at exactly the same time in April with this energy price cap increase. And we're obviously used to spikes in global energy prices, but we're not used to that feeding through into everybody's bills at exactly the same time.
So who's going to be hit hardest, do you think, by the different problems that you've outlined?
So I think overall we should think about everybody feeling squeezed by different elements of it, whether you're low earner, mid earner, or top earner. Different bits will, though, affect people very differently. So the tax increases will be disproportionately paid by higher earners and higher income households. That's particularly true of the national insurance rise that's coming through. I would say, in your headlines earlier, you were saying that the Labour Party says that pensioners will be hardest hit. I think that's wrong, because pensioners in almost all cases won't pay the increase in national insurance.
The research that was about fuel bills. Because they're saying they already pay twice as much on average for heating and other households.
So I think pensioners who, until recently, were the group that spent most time in their houses, although lots of us are now doing that, do have higher energy bills, so they will be hit harder by the energy price increase. But pensioners won't pay disproportionately on the tax increase. That will be higher earners. But overall, mid-earners will also be hit by the freeze of the income tax threshold and the increase in national insurance. And that's on top of the usual increases you expect at this time of year to council tax and the rest. Now, the energy bill increase, as you said, will be slightly harder for older households that stay at home, but it will also be much harder to bear for lower income households. And I think this is the really key. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of a crisis, which is you've got hundreds of pounds, thousands, possibly up to £1,000 for large energy user increase in bills happening for households. This is an essential good. It's very volatile in price, and lower income households don't have the ability just to save a bit less for a few months or to cut kind of non-essential spending in the same way as some others do.
And so what kind of action, if the government decided they want to do something about energy bills, what could they do? I think Labour is calling the government to get rid of VAT on fuel bills.
Yeah, so I think reducing VAT on fuel bills would make a small dent in the increase. It's about £100 off everybody's bill from the year when you had that in place. It's not the best targeted measure because, as you say, it affects everybody. But it's not useless in terms of making a dent in this increase. But the most important thing is that we have a much larger intervention that's targeted at lower earning households. Now, the most efficient way to do that would be through the benefit system, because that's the way we know we can make payments happen on a regular basis. I think the government maybe not want to do that because they've obviously recently removed the £20 uplift to the universal credit and also put in place more generous support for working lower income households. So they don't want to do that.
What about the warm homes discount? That's a scheme to help poorer households.
So that's where you go if you don't want to use the benefit system to do this. It would have to be you can use the label and the mechanism of the warm homes discount, but it would have to be pretty significantly undergo surgery to be effective. One, it's not big enough. It's currently £140 for households as a payment. We need to see a significantly larger payment to make a dent in a bill rise of £700-800 in April. Secondly, you'd need to ensure it was an additional payment, because remember, the warm home discount is actually done by the end of March this year. And more importantly, it needs to go to a wider range of families, and it needs to do so automatically, because although it goes to poor pensioner households automatically, poorer working age households have to apply for it, and there are quotas operated by your company, and you couldn't have a company just saying no because it had hit their quota of number of households that had claimed. Instead, you'd have to have the taxpayer picking up the bill for warm home discount, because remember, again, at present, that discount is funded via a levy on everybody else's energy bills. So that clearly can't be the answer to this problem we're facing now. So a heavily amended warm homes discount could be part of the picture here.
Torsten Bell. I then put some of those points to the Business Minister, Paul Scully, and began by asking him about what the government's planning to do on rising energy costs.
So what we're doing, obviously there is a global spike in fuel prices. The long-term view clearly has to be to reduce reliance on the big fluctuations in prices with fossil fuels. But there is this short-term issue that we've got to get through. So what we were doing is we're working with Ofgem and the energy companies to see what more we can do to abate the increases in energy costs at this time.
Interesting to say that you are looking at that. It was one of the possibilities, looking at the warm homes discount, which is a relatively small payment that families get at the moment, some families.
Well, the warm homes discount is 2.2 million households that benefit from that. It's £140 at the moment. It's increasing that to £150 and expanding the coverage to 2.7 million households. We've also got the winter fuel payment, which goes to 11.4 million pensioners across the country, and obviously the seasonal cold weather payments as well. So
that's what's happening at the moment. But I suppose what people who are facing these big bills want to know is, are you going to do anything more? And would that be one route doing it? We heard that if you do do that, you would need a lot of changes, make lots more households eligible, make automatic payments more widespread.
Well, as I say, the two things, we'll always look at what we can do, especially for targeted approaches to support
and this
people,
would be targeted, wouldn't it?
especially absolutely, but especially at the lowest pay, because there is a wider cost of living issue that you've talked about in your piece there, and that's why we've also increased the national minimum wage to the next increase is £9.50, the biggest cash increase since it started, and we've made increases to local housing allowance, and also by changing the taper and universal credit, that's made people £1,000 better off that are in receipt of universal credit. So there's a lot of different things that we need to do, but clearly we need to look at the energy situation, which we continue to do with energy companies. The Chancellor is also, will be looking at this in the round alongside public services.
But alongside looking at that, and except you say you're looking to do something there, but at the same time as people are facing the higher energy bills, mortgage rates, food going up, the government's raising taxes, not just through national insurance, but also by freezing income tax. Are you determined to go ahead with those rises?
Well, in terms of income tax, we actually have the highest basic rate threshold in the G20, and that's something that's increased by something like 50% over the last 5 years.
Well, that's over the last 5 years. But looking ahead, because you're freezing the allowances, as the Telegraph reports today, 1 million people are going to be pulled into paying the higher rate of tax.
What we're actually making sure is that actually people can that we're targeting the lowest paid. We're taking the lowest paid out of tax entirely. We've increased the minimum wage, the national living wage for them. But in terms of the people that you're talking about, we've got to get the balance right so that we've got taxes coming in to pay for the public services, pay for the NHS, which is obviously first and foremost at the moment in people's minds with the COVID pandemic and the challenges that
this has been called a stealth tax, the way that you're freezing these allowances.
No, I think we've been really open about the way that we've approached it in the budget, but it's right that we use the revenues for stronger growth to pay for our public services, and that the burden of that falls on the people with the broader shoulders, the highest paid. You talked about some of the other tax levies, the national insurance tax levy, which obviously again will help tackle the pressures on the NHS at the moment, and then we'll start to move towards. So
despite all the political pressure, cabinet ministers,
it will start to change to tackle that intractable problem which has been unaddressed for a number of years about social care. But again, even that, the top 14% earners will pay around 50% of the money that's raised from that levy. So it's a progressive tax.
OK, well, I wanted to move on now to the Downing Street flat, and a huge amount of detail in all of this. But let's just cut through to the principle. And the principle is that prime ministers don't get money directly from donors. And the point of view from Labour we just heard, they're saying that Lord Brownlow got access because he was paying for flat renovations. That's potentially corruption.
No, I disagree. I mean, the Prime Minister will get approaches from people all the time, and it was absolutely right that all this talk about great exhibitions and was tackled with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, where it belongs.
Arguably that is exactly where it belongs. But if you look at the text, the message that the Prime Minister sent to Lord Brownlow, in the very same message that he's asking for money to pay for renovations to his flat, he has a PS: "Am on the Great Exhibition Plan will revert." Which looks very much like linkage, doesn't it?
It was passed on to Department of Culture, Media and Sport, where it belongs, and it wasn't progressed. So I think that's really clear what has happened there. But
given that the Prime Minister has to remain above any kind of suspicion, why is he linking the idea of asking for money for his flat with a possible exhibition?
Well, I'm not sure he was. I think it's he's obviously been approached about this, and he could have sent two messages. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that just by pressing send between sending two messages is going to actually be any more help. I mean,
should he be offering help to somebody who's paying for his renovations in any message?
Well, what he did is he passed it on to it's Department of Culture, Media and Sport that tackled it, and they've not progressed it. We're having the Festival UK, which was announced in our manifesto and previously by Theresa May, the former Prime Minister.
You say it's not progressed, but Lord Brownlow, the man who paid for the Downing Street flat renovations, more than £100,000, did get a meeting with the Culture Secretary.
Well, he may well have approached. I have no idea whether he approached the Culture and Media Secretary directly himself anyway, whether it was the Prime Minister that did this or not. But either way, it was pushed off to the right channels and it was dealt with in the correct way. But bearing in mind, of course, with this is that the Prime Minister believed he was dealing with a blind trust for the cost of this. He had no idea who was actually paying for it directly.
Well, that's the point of dispute, isn't it? But it doesn't sound very blind if he's sending messages to the man who
was chairing the trust.
And who was, as we now know, was actually paying for the renovations. He's sending direct messages and talking about helping him out. Am on the Great Exhibition Plan will revert.
Well, I think we'd probably make more of this because I think that he was sending messages to the chair, the person that was setting up that blind trust, that was going to be chairing that blind trust. So that was an appropriate communication, and that's why Lord Geidt, when he's looked at this and he's seen the additional, the missing exchanges, as he describes it, has not seen fit to change his comments to the fact that there was no breach of the ministerial code.
Although he's pretty critical, though, isn't he? And he does say that a number of my original conclusions may have required further examination or qualification had the missing exchange been known to me.
But he's also said that there's no... and undoubtedly, and look, the Prime Minister has apologised for that, but clearly there was... the Prime Minister or the Cabinet Office did not have access to those messages during that investigation because of security reasons. There's a well-known breach of security.
But even when they got the messages, the staff didn't pass it on to Lord Geidt, which he's clearly rather frustrated
about.
I
think when, as I say, that process is done. The Prime Minister has apologised for it. He's agreed to meet Lord Geidt to make changes to the Office of the Independent Advisor, and that's the right thing to do. But nonetheless, as I say, the Lord Geidt didn't see fit to change his view that there was no breach of the ministerial code. I think what's really important now, as important as that issue is, and I don't underestimate it, it's important that we tackle the cost of living crisis that you're talking about and the ongoing pandemic.
Paul Scully, the Business Minister. That's all from the Best of Today podcast. Thank you for listening. I'm Martha Carney. More on BBC Sounds.